Well, hey everybody, I really hope your personal Bible study is going well. And from our last video, I talked about three things to keep in mind as you study the Bible: the observation, interpretation, and application steps. These are things that we all need to put in place when we study the Bible if we really want to dig in, asking those questions: what do I see? What does it mean? And how do I apply this to my life? Well, hey, something I looked at today is just to get a greater appreciation of where we got the Bible that we read. And so sometimes we kind of wonder, like, what translation should I read? Do I do the ESV? Should I do the King James? What about the Christian Standard, the New American, the Read With Me Bible? Which one of these, New King James, the New Living Translation, which one of these should I focus in on? And I think that's a conversation for another day. But today what I want to look at is a little bit of the history, actually, of how we get the English versions of the Bible that we read and appreciate. I think this is an important thing to have this in the back of our minds so we can really appreciate the fact that every one of us have multiple copies of various translations at our fingertips. And on our devices, we can just go through and scroll through dozens of translations. But how did this all happen? Well, this will be a very abbreviated version of this, but just a few high points I want to point out. Now, it's important to understand that the Old Testament is written in Hebrew primarily, and some portions in the language Aramaic, and the New Testament is written in the Greek language. All of these collections in the New Testament. And so that's what they're originally written in, Hebrew and Greek. And from there, they get translated into other languages. And so here is kind of a list here of, I think, is some high points. There are some other very important moments along the way, but these are some of the ones I want to highlight. The first here, because of some of the important things that we're going to see, is in 403, Jerome translates the Bible from the Hebrew and Greek to Latin. Latin, and why did he do this? Because Latin was the language of the day. This was the language that the people spoke, and he wanted them to have it in their hands and in their own language, in their tongue that they speak. And the Latin Vulgate is what it would be called, and it becomes a cornerstone of Bible translation for centuries, the Latin Vulgate. Well, in 1382, this is several years, there's a huge jump there. Then there is Bible translation work that goes on there, but in 1382, John Wycliffe translates the first English Bible, and he uses the Latin. He uses the translation that Jerome had, and he translates it into English. Well, this was frowned upon greatly. In 1408, there was a decree that came out that says it is now banned, that you cannot, in England, cannot translate the Bible to English. It's an illegal practice. And John Wycliffe's remains are actually dug up and burned because it's considered a heretical thing that he did. In 1522, we get the translation from the great reformer Martin Luther, but he translates the New Testament into German. He's from Germany, and he's translating it into the native language of the people where he lives, and he translates the New Testament. In 1525, William Tyndale translates the Bible into English from the Greek language. He follows the same pattern like Martin Luther did. Martin Luther translating from the Greek to German. They wanted the Bible to be in the native language of the people they were around. And this was not something that was accepted. It was not something that people were pleased with. When I say people, it is predominantly the Roman Catholic Church that had a animosity towards this practice. Wycliffe, as we remember, his bones were exhumed and burned. Well, Tyndale himself was burned at the stake for translating the Bible to English. He had to actually flee to Germany to translate it and then smuggled in copies into England. Well, in 1611, King James authorizes a translation of the entire Bible from the original languages, the Hebrew and the Greek, into English. And they actually used Tyndale's, his version, as well as a little bit of a basis as they were doing their translation. It was around that same time, 1610, that they do a Reims Bible, is translated into English. And this is a Catholic Bible that was translated from the Latin to English. It is interesting to note, I think an interesting thing to note in church history, that it wasn't until the 1960s that for the Roman Catholic Church that Mass would start being in the native language. It was in Latin all the time up until then. It was also in the 1960s that the first Bible translation by Catholic scholars was done from the Hebrew and Greek. Before that, it was all based upon the Latin Vulgate, back in 403 by Jerome. Well, today we have multiple versions and translations. Many of our modern translations, most of them, true translations, not paraphrases, but the true translations, go back to the Hebrew and Greek, which I think is an important thing. We owe much to the Latin Vulgate and these translations to our modern translation today, but it is an important thing when they go back to the original text in translating to the English today. And so I hope this has been a helpful thing just to understand, wow, what an amazing blessing we have today to have so many copies and translations of the Bible in our own language, the English language. We have them piled up. My hope is that they're not gathering dust, that we are spending time diving into the Word, trying to see what it's telling us, understanding its meaning, and applying it to our lives. I'll see you next week, and we'll throw out a couple other things and helpful tips about studying the Bible, and also maybe some tips about prayer. I'll see you then.